Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Doris Bergen, the Chancellor Rose and Ray Wolfe Professor of Holocaust Studies here at the University of Toronto. If you looked at earlier publicity, you may have expected Michael Maris, who's unable to be here today. So it's my honor to moderate this symposium, Jews and Ukrainians, a Millennium of Coexistence. Those of you who were with us yesterday heard Professor Anna Sternches describe the special nature of these two events. Events here at the University of Toronto that are co-sponsored and organized together by our Anne Tannenbaum Center for Jewish Studies and our John Yaremko Chair of Ukrainian Studies. This is a really, I think, important achievement to recognize and to note that this event brings together Ukrainian studies, Jewish studies, and Holocaust studies, working together with the support of our colleagues, our institution, and our community. I want to start with a special word of thanks to all of the co-sponsors of this event. We thank, of course, the Anne Tannenbaum Center for Jewish Studies, whose director, Professor Anna Sternches, is here on the podium. We also thank the John Yaremko Chair of Ukrainian Studies, the chairholder, Professor Bob Magochi, also here with us, and the Chancellor Rose and Ray Wolfe Chair of Holocaust Studies, held by me. Our co-sponsors also include the Petrovsky-Shtern program at the Center for European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies. We're very grateful to them. And of course, to the Ukrainian Jewish Encounter, who not only co-sponsored this event, but also commissioned the book, which of course is the work of the two authors. I want to say a special word of thanks as well to Ryan Masters, who's coordinated the logistics for this event. Like every event, we depend so much on the people who do the legwork. Before I introduce our five panelists, I want to say a few words about the symposium, how we'll proceed, and especially what it means. Now, all of you know that we're here, among other things, to celebrate the appearance, the publication of a book, a very handsome book, Jews and Ukrainians, a Millennium of Coexistence. And we're fortunate to have the two authors, Professor Magochi and Professor Yohanan Petrovsky-Shtern, with us here today. The book covers a big topic, a millennium, coexistence. And it seems to me we would not be doing justice to the ambition of the book, to the scholarship of its authors, if we did not engage its contents deeply and also critically. If we did not think about the scholarly and the ethical issues surrounding not only the book, but the larger question of Jewish Ukrainian dialogue. So to that end, when we set up this symposium, I invited each of the speakers to choose their own area to emphasize. They can talk specifically about the book, or they can engage more broadly, issues around Ukrainian-Jewish encounters and dialogue. But I also want to start by asking you, as the audience, to think about what's at stake in this discussion. It's so easy to use those words, coexistence, dialogue. They roll off the tongue. In his comments yesterday, Professor Petrovsky-Shtern reminded us that, of course, it hasn't always been easy, that some people, he talked about Ivan Chuba, have gone to prison for comments that they made about Jews and Ukrainians, Jews in Ukraine. Even in our world, looking around the audience yesterday, thinking about who was present, thinking about who is involved in the Ukrainian-Jewish encounter, I was reminded that we too have people, many of them Jews, who have devoted their energy, their time, even their lives, to promoting dialogue and understanding. People whose own families were killed on Ukrainian soil, some of them by Ukrainians. It's a high cost, the dialogue we're discussing. I also thought about the wealth of scholarship particularly on the World War II period, my own area of expertise, scholarship dealing with Jews in Ukraine, Jews and Ukrainians, much of it written by people from Ukraine, ethnic Ukrainians, also Mennonites, ethnic Russians, ethnic Poles, and others, some of them our own graduate students and colleagues, people who, at a very high personal and professional cost, risked looking into the past to find things that could be very, very difficult for them and their communities. But they did so because they were committed to something about truth, and the kind of truth on which a person can build relationships and communities with integrity. So, ladies and gentlemen, I probably don't need to remind most of you here, but this is very serious business. And for that reason, we're very fortunate to have with us here at the podium 5 very serious scholars who will help us address these issues and examine them from a number of different angles. I'm going to introduce them all first. Each of them is going to give a formal statement, around 15 minutes. Then they're going to give just a very brief response to the others, and then we'll open it up to your questions and discussion, and after that, the reception. So our first speaker will be Professor Anna Sternches, who holds the Alan Malka Green Associate Chair of Yiddish Studies and is director of the Anne Tannenbaum Center for Jewish Studies, as mentioned, here at the University of Toronto. She received her doctorate at Oxford and is the author of Soviet and Kosher, Jewish Popular Culture in the Soviet Union, 1923 to 1939, and also of a book that will appear in just a few months called When Sonia Met Boris, an oral history of Jewish life under Stalin. Professor Sternches is co-editor-in-chief of East European Jewish Affairs. She will be followed by our second speaker, Ori Yehudai, who's a visiting assistant professor of Jewish history here at the University of Toronto. His research focuses on modern Jewish and Israeli history, and in particular on Jewish migration and displacement. His PhD is from the University of Chicago. He has won many fellowships and awards from the American Council of Learned Societies, the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Wiener Library in London, and the Israel Institute in Washington, D.C. He's currently writing a book on Jewish outmigration from Palestine and Israel between 1945 and 1967. After Professor Yehudai, we will hear from Professor Frank Sisson, who is director of the Peter Jaczek Center for Ukrainian Historical Research at the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies. He's also professor in the Department of History and Classics at the University of Alberta, and he is a member of the Academic Council of the Ukrainian Jewish Encounter. He's the author and editor of many publications. I only want to mention 2 titles. He's the co-author with Serhei Plokhy of Religion and Nation in Modern Ukraine, and the editor-in-chief of the 3-volume collected works of Father Mikhailo Zbritsky, Volume 1, Scholarly Works, Volume 2, Toward a Biography. Our fourth speaker is one of our 2 authors. Many of you heard him yesterday, so I don't have to maybe give the full details. Professor Yochanan Petrovsky-Shtern is the Crown Family Professor of Jewish Studies and a professor of Jewish history at Northwestern University. He has also been a visiting professor at universities all over the world, in Paris, Kiev, Lviv, Warsaw, Krakow, Munich, Boston, and Jerusalem. He's the author of more than 100 articles and 6 books, most recently, The Golden Age Shtetl, well, not as recent as this one, The Golden Age Shtetl, A New History of Jewish Life in East Europe, which won a National Jewish Book Award. And finally, our final speaker, the other co-author of the book, will be Professor Paul Robert Magochi, Professor of History and Political Science here at the University of Toronto, and as mentioned, holder of the John Yaremko Chair of Ukrainian Studies. He is also the author of many, many works, Many of them will be familiar to you. I'm again only going to mention a few titles, maybe my personal favorites. A History of Ukraine, the Land and Its Peoples. A book called Of the Making of Nationalities, There Is No End, 2 volumes. Another quite recent publication, 2014, This Blessed Land, Crimea and Crimean Tatars. Professor Magolchi, too, has taught at many other institutions, at Harvard University, at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, at Prešov University in Slovakia, and he holds a number of honorary degrees. So our speakers will each give, as mentioned, a formal statement, a short response, and the question and answer, and I invite Professor Sternches to take the podium.